Welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking a fascinating and frankly heavily guarded disconnect inside the world of aquaculture. We are diving deep into the technological frontier of Nile tilapia nutrition. Now listen, you might think you know exactly where the industry is heading based on the latest scientific journals, but what if I told you that the academic research you're reading is actually masking a fiercely contested intellectual property battlefield? Over the next few minutes, we're going to uncover the massive gap between what academic science is openly publishing and what corporate entities are quietly locking down through patents. By the end of this, I promise you're going to see the global map of innovation in an entirely new light.
To really wrap our heads around this, let's picture a very relatable scenario. Imagine a formulator working at a small, independent feed mill. They've spent months reading up on moringa, the so-called miracle tree. It's incredibly rich in protein, super sustainable, and it's backed by literally dozens of scientific trials proving that it boosts both growth and immunity in tilapia. To our formulator, it looks like the perfect open frontier, right? So they get ready to pour serious R&D budget into launching a functional moringa-based feed to really stand out in the market. They think they've stumbled upon a wide-open white space for innovation. But what they don't realize is that they are walking totally blind into a field of intellectual property landmines.
Well, here is the harsh reality of that so-called white space. It's actually a trap. Because while the scientific community was out there openly publishing incredibly promising findings on moringa, other players were working entirely behind the scenes to secure their IP rights. Get this, nearly 12% of all tilapia nutrition patents globally already claim the use of moringa. And here's the real kicker, the vast majority of those patent filings belong to Chinese entities. So our poor formulator, who was just relying on academic journals, is stepping directly into a densely patented, heavily restricted thicket.
And this moringa example isn't just some weird one-off anomaly. It perfectly represents a massive structural disconnect that defines the entire global aquaculture landscape today. There are basically two very different games being played at the exact same time. On one hand, you have the game of open scientific discovery. On the other, the game of commercial technological appropriation. If you're only paying attention to the science, you are completely blind to who actually controls the future of the market.
To put that into perspective, this disconnect is playing out on a massive global scale. In the open academic world, Egypt is the undisputed heavyweight champion of tilapia nutrition research. They generate over 26% of all global publications. Institutions like Zagazig University are doing absolutely incredible, cutting-edge work on things like immunonutrition and oxidative stress. But then you look at who actually holds the intellectual property, you won't find those Egyptian universities there. Not at all. The patent side is entirely dominated by corporate multinationals and Chinese state agencies. It's a classic setup. Science generates the knowledge, but industry captures all the value.
When we zoom in on exactly who is capturing that value, a very clear oligopoly emerges. The multinational giant DSM leads the entire sector with 28 patent families, focusing heavily on functional additives and lipids. Right behind them, we have the Chinese Academy of Fishery Sciences, which is a state apparatus, by the way, holding 21 families. And then rounding out the top is Novozymes, with 17 families absolutely dominating enzymatic biotechnology. So this is a highly concentrated, incredibly tight arena.
Which naturally leads us to a pretty massive question. How exactly did China manage to capture so much of this patent space, especially when it comes to plant-based phytogenics like moringa? I mean, if the Western multinationals are busy grabbing up all the enzymes and synthetic additives, how did local Chinese firms and state agencies manage to lock down natural botanical inputs?
The answer to that is hidden in one staggering, almost unbelievable statistic: 38.5%. That is the percentage of all tilapia feed patents that officially incorporate a pharmaceutical classification, specifically the A61K patent code used for medicinal preparations. Just think about that for a second. Nearly 40% of the patents meant for everyday fish feed are officially classified with therapeutic or pharmaceutical claims.
So what does this all mean? It means the line between simple nutrition and pharmacology is rapidly blurring. And this massive overlap is being driven largely by the principles of traditional Chinese medicine being directly applied to commercial diets. It is the ultimate IP gateway. By treating a natural botanical ingredient as a therapeutic immunostimulant, meaning something that actively provokes an immune response, rather than just acting as a standard feed input, the Chinese biotechnological ecosystem has successfully captured the intellectual property over natural plant-based inputs. They aren't just patenting feed anymore. They are literally patenting medicated feed.
Okay, so knowing all this, how on earth do we navigate this landscape? If plant proteins are heavily patented and natural botanicals are trapped behind therapeutic IP, where are the real, uncontested spaces for future innovation? Let's pivot for a second and focus on actionable insights. We need a reliable way to map out the genuine gaps between what researchers are studying and what corporations already own.
To do that, we rely on something called the Revealed Technology Advantage Index, or RTA. Think of this as our treasure map for today's explainer. It's a really simple ratio. It just compares how much a specific topic is represented in scientific literature versus how much it's represented in patents. If the RTA is greater than 1, science is leading the way, which means there's a potential open opportunity. But if it's less than 1, industry is already dominating that patent space, and you should probably steer clear.
So let's apply our map, starting with the misleading white spaces, the areas that look like great opportunities at first glance, but really aren't. Take plant protein, for example. It makes up about 12% of all science, but a massive 30% of patents. That is heavily saturated, locked-down territory. Then we have enzymes. Huge science at over 27%, and low patents at 8.4%. Looks like a gold mine, right? Actually, scratch that. Those patents are intensely monopolized by a tight oligopoly of DSM and Novozymes, so the barrier to entry is just impossibly high. And finally, biofloc. High science, virtually 0 patents. But that's because biofloc is a water management technique. It's not a commercial, patentable product. It's fundamentally unpatentable.
Now this is where things get really exciting. Let's look at the actual actionable gaps. Check out sustainability and feed economics. This area boasts nearly 20% of all academic research, backed by a rapidly growing body of knowledge, but it accounts for less than 8% of patents. And crucially, there is no single multinational giant dominating this segment yet. It is fully patentable, and the field is wide open. Secondarily, look at chitosan, which is a versatile biopolymer extracted from crustacean shells. It sits at a perfect equilibrium, right around 1.5% in both science and patents. But the multinationals are largely absent here. It represents a perfectly open, albeit smaller functional niche for independent formulators.
Let's pan out for a second and see how all of this builds into the future. Because, as we all know, the market is never static. Now that we know exactly where the current gaps are, we need to look ahead. We have to anticipate where the entire sector's innovation is shifting over the next 4 to 7 years before these new white spaces disappear entirely. And the academic data paints a picture of profound transformation. First, we're seeing a massive shift toward novel protein replacement, specifically leaning into insect meal like the black soldier fly and precision fermentation. Second, and this is actually the fastest accelerating front we're seeing right now, is nanobiotechnology applied directly to nutrition. We are literally talking about using nanometric delivery vehicles to precisely target nutrients and functional additives. And third, we are seeing a total paradigm shift. The industry is moving away from just measuring simple muscle growth and instead prioritizing comprehensive gut and metabolic health. Digestive well-being is officially the new metric for success. But we have to remember, these massive technological shifts aren't just happening in a vacuum. They are being heavily accelerated by severe, real-world, market and environmental pressures. Climate change is introducing massive salinity stress to farming systems that used to be completely stable. Global markets are demanding much stricter food safety requirements, and we're seeing the sudden rise of novel pathogens like Oreochromis farronii, which proves that our health agenda has to adopt far beyond the classic threats we're used to. Formulators absolutely must prepare for these exact realities today. So the absolutely crucial takeaway is this. The science in tilapia nutrition is abundant, it's open, and it is incredibly accessible. But as we've clearly seen today, strategic commercial opportunity only resides in the specific spaces that haven't already been locked down by corporate giants or state ecosystems. The illusion of the open white space is very real, but so are the genuine gaps, if you just know how to look for them. So I'll leave you with this one thought. Armed with this deep data, where will you build your intellectual property before the white space disappears for good?